Hollywood didn't just sell movies, it sold people, carefully packaged, strategically silenced, and brutally controlled. These 13 stars didn't just act on screen, they performed their entire existence. And the machine behind the curtain made absolutely sure you never found out the truth. Number 1. Hattie McDaniel. She made history with a golden statue in her hands, the first black performer to ever win an Academy Award. Let that land for a second. But here's what they conveniently leave out of the celebration reel. Hattie McDaniel was not permitted to sit beside her own castmates at the ceremony. She was redirected to a segregated table at the back of the room, separated from the very film that made her a legend. Gone with the Wind put her face on every poster, then locked her inside a box labeled Servant and nailed it shut. Every script that followed handed her a maid's apron. Every time she reached for something larger, the industry recoiled. When she dared to speak with any sense of dignity or ambition, they called her ungrateful. When she pushed back even slightly, they simply cut her scenes entirely. She passed away with her Oscar stored in a closet. Not displayed, not celebrated, stored. "I'd rather play a maid than be one," she once said. But what she was really saying, underneath that carefully constructed composure, was that she deserved the right to play anything at all. Hollywood gave her a trophy with one hand and a broom with the other. Number 2, Frances Farmer Brilliant, ferocious, completely unwilling to perform obedience on command. Frances Farmer was exactly the kind of woman the studio system had no use for, and every reason to destroy. She didn't smile when directors told her to. She didn't shrink when producers pressured her. She asked uncomfortable questions and refused to pretend the answers didn't matter. In 1940s Hollywood, that wasn't called integrity. It was called a problem. So the machine found a solution. They labeled her emotionally unstable. They escalated the narrative until it became institutional. She was committed against her will and spent the better part of a decade inside facilities where, according to accounts she later documented, she endured procedures and treatment that stripped away not just her freedom but her fundamental sense of self. By the time she walked back out, Hollywood had already replaced her. The industry moved on without a single backward glance. She spent her remaining years hosting a regional television program, piecing her story back together in fragments. "I have been torn apart," she once said, "but I will not be ashamed." The system that manufactured her image ultimately dismantled her mind. And still, she never handed them the silence they were counting on. Number 3. Judy Garland. They called her a prodigy, a once-in-a-generation talent, a national treasure. She was 13 years old when MGM signed her and handed her, in the same moment, her first diet mandate and her first controlled substance. The studio told her she was too heavy, too ordinary, too human for what they needed. So they prescribed stimulants to shrink her body and sedatives to manage her when the stimulants made her uncontrollable. She filmed The Wizard of Oz on injured feet, running on pharmaceutical cocktails, under a contract that essentially owned every hour of her existence. "Be happy, Judy," they'd say. So she smiled, and behind the smile, she shook. By 23, she had already attempted to end her own life. By 47, she was gone, found in a London bathroom, the wreckage of a childhood she never actually got to live scattered around her. Here is the truth that Hollywood has always preferred you didn't examine too closely. Judy Garland didn't collapse. She was methodically taken apart, one pill, one directive, one dehumanizing instruction at a time, by an industry that extracted everything she had and called it stardom. Number 4, Dorothy Dandridge. She stood on that Oscar stage as a nominee, the first black woman in history to reach that category for Best Actress. The audience applauded. The cameras captured the moment. And then the industry showed her exactly what that applause was actually worth. Dorothy Dandridge's stardom came wrapped in conditions. She could not use the swimming pool at the venue where she performed, the same venue that paid for her name on the marquee. She could not appear in romantic scenes with white co-stars without triggering outrage from audiences the studios refused to challenge. When she finally secured leading roles, the scripts that followed were either degrading, creatively hollow, or simply non-existent. She took nightclub bookings to maintain financial stability. She privately funded specialized care for her daughter, who had significant medical needs. And to get through the mounting pressure of all of it, she leaned on substances that eventually consumed her. She was 42 years old when she died. The official classification was accidental overdose. But there is a version of this story where Dorothy Dandridge didn't stumble, where she was systematically cornered by a racial hierarchy so deeply embedded in the entertainment industry that it had its own unwritten rule book. She didn't fall from grace. She was pushed, and the industry that pushed her didn't even turn around to watch. Number 5, Ramon Novarro. In the silent film era, Ramon Novarro was untouchable, exotic, magnetic, adored across continents. The camera loved him in a way that felt almost supernatural, but the life he lived off camera existed under constant, exhausting pressure. He was a gay man in an era when that identity wasn't just socially unacceptable, it was genuinely dangerous. He was also deeply Catholic. He was also monumentally famous. 3 things that pulled in 3 completely incompatible directions, all at once, for his entire adult life. He navigated it with extreme discretion. Rumors circulated, as they always did in Hollywood, but nothing concrete ever attached itself to his public image. Until 1968, 2 men forced their way into his home, apparently convinced he was hiding a significant amount of cash. There was no cash. What followed was a brutal attack that ended his life. He was 79 years old. The tabloid press, which had largely left him alone while he was alive, tore into every private detail of his existence the moment he was gone. They dissected him in death with a gleeful thoroughness they never applied to his actual legacy or his genuine artistic contributions. He died the same way he had lived, profoundly misread by the world around him, and completely alone in the understanding of who he actually was. Number 6, Sal Mineo. He burned through the screen in Rebel Without a Cause, raw, vulnerable, magnetic in a way that felt almost too honest for the era. He wasn't playing a lost young man. He was being one. Sal Mineo understood his own identity at a time when that understanding was essentially a liability. He was gay in an industry still operating under the long shadow of the Hays Code's moral rule book. He loved genuinely and quietly, And Hollywood, fresh off years of enforced on-screen propriety, had absolutely no architecture for what he actually was. As he aged past the teen idol window, the roles evaporated. The industry that had spotlighted him simply redirected the beam. He transitioned to theater, to independent projects, to anything that offered creative oxygen. In 1976, just as a legitimate comeback was beginning to take shape, he was stabbed to death in an alley behind his apartment building. Investigators concluded it was a random encounter with no personal motive. But there is something unbearably cruel about the specific geography of it. A man who spent decades hiding in the margins of his own life, finally stepping back toward the light and being taken out in the dark. Just steps away, just barely too far. Number 7. Rock Hudson tall, commanding. The kind of screen presence that made entire cinemas collectively hold their breath. Rock Hudson was the physical embodiment of what mid-century America decided masculinity was supposed to look like. It was a performance, an extraordinarily disciplined, industry-engineered, commercially indispensable performance. In the 1950s, being a gay man in Hollywood wasn't a personal matter. It was a professional catastrophe waiting to happen. When whispers started gaining enough volume to become a problem, his management team implemented a solution with the same cold efficiency they applied to everything else. A marriage was arranged to his secretary, Phyllis Gates. Photographs were taken. Stories were placed in the right publications. The closet had a lock, and the key was made of box office receipts. For years, Rock Hudson executed his public persona with remarkable precision. Romantic comedies, choreographed press appearances, the carefully maintained mystique of the eternal bachelor. Behind all of it, he loved in stolen moments and sustained fear. The hardest role I ever played, he once said, was Rock Hudson. In 1985, his body could no longer sustain the weight of what had been concealed. His illness became public. He became, in that moment of exposure, not just a patient, but an unavoidable, undeniable human being, one who had loved and hidden, and finally, at the very end, let the truth breathe. Number 8. Tab Hunter Blonde, sun-bronzed, smiling with the kind of effortless precision that made teenage girls in the 1950s genuinely question their capacity for rational thought. Tab Hunter was, by every visible metric, the perfect American male specimen. The magazines confirmed it monthly. The studio scheduling department confirmed it with every carefully arranged public appearance. The reality was that Tab Hunter was performing a character, not on screen, but in every interview, every photo opportunity, every orchestrated romance with a female co-star. He was gay in an era when the industry's response to that information was not support or accommodation, but damage control. Studio-managed dates with prominent actresses, carefully placed stories about mysterious bachelor romances, quiet, firm instructions to play along or face consequences that were never explicitly stated, but always clearly understood. "I didn't live a lie," he said decades later. "I lived a half-truth." By the time Hollywood no longer required his particular image, the truth was finally permitted to exist. But during the years when it would have mattered most, when he was young and visible and carrying the full weight of the fabrication, The truth was simply not an option they offered him. Number 9. Loretta Young, the face of dignity, the symbol of virtue. In a town that ran on open secrets and barely concealed scandals, Loretta Young was presented to the public as something approaching moral perfection, which made what happened in 1935 particularly complicated to manage. During the production of The Call of the Wild, Loretta Young became involved with Clark Gable. She became pregnant. She was unmarried. She was a deeply committed Catholic, and she was bound by a studio contract that had very specific expectations about the public behavior of its assets. She vanished from public life. When she returned, she presented a child she described as having adopted from an orphanage. The child was her biological daughter. The father was one of the most recognizable men in the world, who acknowledged none of it, publicly or privately. For decades, Loretta maintained the constructed narrative through prayer and practiced silence. Her daughter, Judy Lewis, lived inside the mystery of her own origins for years, until she looked closely enough in the mirror and the questions answered themselves. The ears, the eyes, the unmistakable architecture of a face she recognized from film posters. Loretta eventually confessed in old age, trembling with the weight of something carried for an entire lifetime. "I did what I thought was right," she said quietly. But a lie, sustained long enough, doesn't stay contained. It raises children. It shapes identities. It leaves marks that outlast everyone who agreed to keep the secret. Number 10. Jean Peters. In the early 1950s, Jean Peters was positioned as one of the most promising actresses working in Hollywood. Critics circled her name with anticipation. The studio machinery was already building the infrastructure of a major career. Then she married Howard Hughes. And she disappeared. Not metaphorically. She actually, physically, socially, professionally disappeared. She terminated her studio contract, withdrew entirely from public life, and for 14 years, virtually no one outside Hughes' immediate circle could confirm with certainty what her daily existence actually looked like. Hughes was, by any measured assessment, a man whose relationship with conventional reality had become increasingly strained. He operated behind layers of security, secrecy, and personal eccentricity that bordered on the impenetrable. Jean existed somewhere inside all of that. Some people who studied the situation concluded she had been effectively isolated. Others maintained she had made a deliberate choice to step away from the spotlight on her own terms. What is documented, she only re-emerged after Hughes died. She gave no interviews about the marriage, not one, not ever. "My life," she told a reporter who managed to reach her, "was never meant for the public." The studio had packaged their relationship as a love story. The truth of what those 14 years actually contained went with Jean Peters to her grave. Number 11. Vera Ellen. She moved across the screen like something that had never quite fully landed on Earth, technically flawless, impossibly light, the kind of dancer who made the camera forget it was supposed to be pointing at everyone else, too. Behind that extraordinary physical precision was something the industry not only ignored, but actively rewarded, a battle with severe food restriction that had quietly consumed her life. Studio executives praised her dimensions. Costume designers constructed increasingly fitted garments around a body that was diminishing. At a certain point, she stopped wearing short sleeves in any professional or public context. Speculation about the physical condition of her arms circulated among people who worked closely with her, and went unaddressed by everyone with the authority to intervene. She danced through all of it, bones registering the cost of every performance, muscles operating well past any reasonable threshold, heart quietly fracturing under the weight of maintaining an appearance the industry had told her was her greatest professional asset. When the bookings stopped coming, Vera Ellen simply withdrew. There was no memoir, no carefully managed exit interview. She lost her only child to sudden infant death syndrome, retreated almost completely from any form of public engagement, and spent the remaining decades of her life in near total isolation. Hollywood filed her under graceful, but grace, in her particular case, was just the name they gave to a survival strategy that was slowly consuming her from the inside. Number 12. Robert Walker. In Strangers on a Train, Robert Walker played a charming, methodical, deeply unsettling figure with a capacity for calculated cruelty that felt genuinely inhabited rather than performed. That's because in a way that Hitchcock either recognized and exploited or simply benefited from. Accidentally, Walker wasn't constructing the character from scratch. He was channeling the specific texture of his own psychological deterioration. His wife, actress Jennifer Jones, had left him for producer David O. Selznick, a man with enough industry power to ensure the situation was handled in ways that worked primarily in Selznick's favor. The dissolution played out in the press with the kind of coverage that left Walker's professional standing intact but dismantled something fundamental in his interior architecture. He began drinking in ways that exceeded social convention. He experienced episodes that people around him described with careful, PR-managed language. Nervous exhaustion, professional stress, the standard vocabulary studios deployed to obscure what was actually happening. The studio's response was not intervention, it was scheduling. They needed their villain. They pushed him back in front of cameras. In 1951, following the completion of filming, Walker suffered a severe episode and was sedated by a private physician. He never recovered consciousness. He was 32 years old. The official documentation listed a medical complication as the cause. The unofficial, unwritten cause was an industry that noticed the cracks forming in a human being and responded by increasing the workload. They packaged these people as icons. They sold us the smiles, the love stories, the golden, frictionless surfaces of manufactured perfection. But behind every perfectly lit close-up was a shadow, and inside every shadow was a truth the machine had calculated was too expensive to allow. They survived by performing fictions. Because in old Hollywood, the truth wasn't just unmarketable, it was dangerous. These stories got buried. Some of them stayed buried for decades.